And so just to introduce, I've invited William Cerrone. He is our CIO, and he'll be able to give us a really good corporate snapshot of who we are as a company. And as well, we have Chris Infante, who's our Director of Engineering, and the entire cybersecurity engineers roll up under his authority. And I'm Denise. I am the cybersecurity specialist, and I do most of the customer-facing work here at Forward Edge. So, William, if you want to kind of give a brief.
Sure. Forward Edge, we are a technology solutions provider. We specialize in solutions tailored exclusively for the K-12 education market. As you can see, our company started in 2005, and we started as a simple hardware and installation firm at that point. Then we were the first company to bring partner managed services to the education sector about 12 years ago, and we always approach that relation, our managed services relationships and any relationships as a partnership, meeting customers where they are and being the right fit for them. So our partner managed services solution spawned from conversations with customers who were seeing the need at that time. We were kind of making the transition from technology being just kind of a bolt-on to technology being a little bit more of an integral piece of their organizations, and they were seeing the requirement that the technology be available, sustainable in their organizations. So a number of years later, our managed services practice kind of evolved. We had a board member stand up and ask us, who's going to be responsible when our district gets hacked? And at the time, we really didn't have an immediate answer. We had a great partnership with this particular client, and they had been a managed services customer for a number of years, but we didn't necessarily have an answer to that. Ironically, sometime later, that client was among one of the first districts in Southwest Ohio. This was several years ago, but among one of the first districts in Southwest Ohio to sustain a major ransomware attack. And it became very clear that when that happens, who's responsible? We are responsible when they get hacked. So fortunately, they've been a customer, like I said, for a couple of years. Our history of implementing best practices, sustainable life cycles, well-documented processes, robust backup solutions and such allowed us to have them back up and running within 8 hours. Ultimately, there was no ransom paid. All data and services were able to be restored. But we did take a number of lessons from that, and it helped us to reshape our managed services, probably get a little bit stronger on some of our policies within managed services, and where we had to draw some lines and things like that. But it did become apparent that managed services and best practices weren't enough. So that's when we kind of started to formalize our cybersecurity offering at that point, because even the most well-run infrastructures needed some sort of a security-focused overlay at that point. So building on some of the respected frameworks of the CIS, the NIST, we've been able to bring what we feel are some of the industry-leading, not we and others feel, are some of the most industry-leading tools, and we've been able to adapt them and bring them into the K-12 space. So again, a little more about who we are. Beyond cybersecurity services, like I said, we started as a hardware and installation company. We still do quite a bit of that. We also think that it's very important to make education transformative through technology at that point. So we have 12 teachers on staff who day in and day out, these are licensed teachers, day in and day out, they are working with teachers and to some extent students in the classroom, in the schools, making technology or improving student outcomes through technology at that point. And we think that really sets us apart from a lot of other companies that are just selling services or just selling hardware, things like that. And as that solution has evolved, we are making an impact on technology actually worldwide. They have a blog that has been subscribed to and a podcast series that has been subscribed to by folks in, I think, 46 different countries at this point. So pretty wide-reaching from that respect. In addition, like I say, we only work with K-12. So our staff of about 100 folks, who we feel are the best and brightest in the industry, they're in schools each and every day, and we see some of the over-designed and under-designed situations that end up in schools and grounds. So that led us to partner with an architect about 5 years ago on building 2 schools in kind of southeastern Ohio at that point, to design the technology, to design the safety and security systems from an electronic standpoint that went into the building. So we started with that 5 years ago, and now today we've done worked with 18 different school districts all across Ohio, 3 different architecture firms, and we are building our 25th building at this point. So that's been a huge part of our business, and again, we think that's something that sets us apart and kind of shows our understanding of the market and the requirements of K-12. As I was saying, we pride ourselves on our customers not leaving out the back door. 99.96% customer retention rate. We still have our company owner, his first customer out of college was Laughlin City Schools here in Ohio. They are still a customer of ours today. So they've been a customer since long before Forward Edge even was its own entity. I would say 100% of our customers are referenceable. I think most of them would have glowing reviews to say. That's not to say we don't have our issues once in a while, but 100% of our customers are referenceable, and 22% of our staff have either worked in the education sector in one way or the other. So whether they were classroom teachers, whether they were technology coordinators within a district, whatever the case may be, 22 of those 100 people definitely have education experience.
Okay, any questions there? We can dive into more corporate questions you have at the end. So initially what we try to do is we try to define the threat. And as you might be aware that there is a real paucity of data surrounding cybersecurity in general, and particularly the K-12 space. There are a lot of organizations that are working to fill this gap, but in the meantime, it exists. So we do our best to gather the data in order to present a threat to our schools.
And what we found is, as we are only K-12, there was no specific solution out there that fit the K-12 space. If you're a large enterprise, there's tons of different solutions out there you can look at. There's even many solutions for small business. But as everybody on this call knows, K-12 fits no other kind of mold. It's its own entity. We have our own challenges in K-12. Things simple as waxing schedules in the summer that throw everybody for loops, to what are we going to do if we do have internet problems or some type of connectivity problems. So it's much different than the typical business. So we've developed our complete cybersecurity solution around K-12, only for K-12, and we'll cover some of those highlights here in the next few slides.
Right, so I just wanted to give that caveat in terms of the data and I think the integrity of the data that we're about to share. So, oh, sorry, I'm clicking on mine. So cyber attackers view schools as easy targets. I think you're probably well aware of this. And basically schools are perceived as easy targets because they're considered to be underfunded and undersupported. I come from about 20 years of enterprise corporate experience. And when we're building out IT departments, one of the metrics we used was IT staff versus device ratio. And when you look at the finance sector, they look at 75 devices per 1 IT staff. So we're very sensitive from a managed services perspective when we go into these districts. We don't want to step on any toes. We're very used to integrating into them very deferentially. What does their culture look like? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? It's the same thing when we go in for these meetings. It's hard to tell them, look, this is where you're deficient. But we're very sensitive to that. And you probably know very well they're undersupported. I mean, you can extrapolate from 1 staff member to 75 devices. That means any kind of endpoint, a laptop or an asset, a server, 1 to 75 ratio. You can extrapolate and look at these districts and understand that these IT directors are really under a lot of stress and they're undersupported for good reason. So I like to point to this graph because this really started to highlight where education started being targeted in 2020. So you don't have to really be able to read that small, but it starts out in March 2020 and ends in August 2020. And the bottom line represents all industries. The top line represents education and research, not K-12 specific necessarily. But you can see where these lines started diverging, obviously because of COVID-19 and the expansion of the remote learning environment, which exponentially expanded the surface attack area for schools. Sorry, next slide. So to dive a little deeper into the K-12 and to reaffirm the last slide, so this was a cybersecurity advisory alert posted in December from CISA, the MS, ISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center, in combination with the FBI. And this is the first time that they ever had posted an FBI-specific alert associated with K-12 only. And also, just so you know, we are members of the FBI InfraGuard because we are considered critical infrastructure because we solely serve the K-12 space. And what's really interesting about this particular advisory is that it defined all the prevalent malware specifically targeting K-12. And 39% of all K-12 malware attacks in 2020 came from a virus that was a Mac-based OS system virus. So everyone who thinks, oh, Macs or Linux is impenetrable, this actually would speak otherwise. And else really interesting about this one? I can't think of anything else more interesting. Okay, next one. So why does education account for 61% of cyber attacks? Well, obviously criminals are attracted toward capital gain, financial gain. Districts have large cash balances that are largely unprotected. So through ransomware and fund transfer fraud, they're able to exploit these large cash balances. Secondarily, they're interested in the sensitive data and the personal identifiable information that districts have. And a lot of superintendents always ask me, what is the deal with this sensitive data? These are minors. Well, when you look at the dark web, I'm always asked about what the dark web really is. So when you look at the internet, there's the clear web that is accessible by anything indexed. So anything you plug into a Google Drive or Google browser rather, that's indexed. That's the indexed World Wide Web. Anything that is the deep web, which accounts for 95% of all data accessible by the web, that is non-indexed. And so when you think about that, that's 95% of the World Wide Web. And that means anything that you have to plug a password into. So think about your financial records or logging onto your computer at work. All that is non-indexed. And then there's the sliver of the web that is called the dark web. And it's less than 1/10 of 1%. And it is very sophisticated. If you think about eBay on steroids, and I've unfortunately had the experience of going to the dark web specifically to look for sensitive data related to minors. And so you need a Tor browser, an Onion browser to access this. And there are all these multiple different markets. And these markets are very sophisticated. They'll have 5 different cryptocurrencies. They'll offer mnemonics in multiple languages. They have escrow accounts to ensure that the buyer gets their goods. They're very sophisticated. And each market is different. Some of them have some ethics and they say, hey, we're not going to deal in organs, or we're not going to traffic in children. So my friend who put me on the web, he actually works for the MITRE Corporation, showed me one market called the Samsara market. And I said, all I want to do is look for minor data. And so he goes, sure. He said, the slang on the dark web for synthetic identities is called Fool's kits, F-U-L-L-Z. So he types in infant fools, boom, up comes all this data, just shocking amounts of data for minors sold, bought, and sold. And he told me that the infant fools kits sell for 10 times of what a regular adult identity kit would sell for, because the cyber criminals have a longer time to exploit the data before that child turns 18. So this is very real, and it's very valuable data. Next slide. So the next couple slides you're going to see, we talked about the lack of data focused on the K-12 space, but there is an organization you may be familiar with already. It's called K-12-6. They're actually a lobbying arm. They're located in Northern Virginia. So all this data comes from that organization. So this all comes from 2020. And again, I think I have some questions about how this data is derived, but nevertheless, it's what we have to work with. So $2 million was the median amount of fund theft from school districts that had fallen victim to spear phishing campaigns targeting administrative staff and district vendors. That was the median amount from 2020. And then last year, they set a record for $9.8 million, a single incident from a school in terms of phishing-related theft.
And phishing alone, we believe, is one of the biggest problems in education. Throughout all of our customer base, as part of our cybersecurity solution, we'll get into that in a little bit, is we do phishing campaigns on an ongoing basis. And when we first bring customers on, we find a fail rate of 20 to 25%, which is shocking. So 1 out of every 4 users is clicking on a link inside of a phishing email, regardless if it's one that we're sending out to help educate them or one that's, you know, a legitimate phish, and possibly entering data. So we were shocked when we started putting these metrics together over the last couple of years to see that it was actually that high.
Yeah.
Luckily, we know we do have some districts that we've seen lower than that. Unfortunately, there's some higher than that. But the trend we've seen through our solution is that number goes down dramatically as we start educating the user base, which is one of the cornerstones of what our program's about.
Right. So obviously, you know, ransomware is in the news daily. And, you know, 2 years ago, ransomware activities, they just involved encrypting and extorting money to restore your operations. Now they actually exfiltrate all your data for additional leverage. And extortion demands 47% increase in severity of ransomware attacks from Q1 to Q2. And year over year from 19 to 2020, there was a 320% increase in school closures resulting from ransomware. And those were from a week of more duration. And this is kind of just a little levity in the middle of all this bad news. So this is Toledo Public Schools was hit, and a parent showed up and all the data was exfiltrated. It was a very big event in Ohio 2 years ago. And so this is a parent that showed up for the board meeting, and he said, they've got our children's information and they're trying to use it. And he started quoting all the message he was getting from emails. His child, his elementary school child, was denied a credit card. They were denied a car loan because of their credit income ratio was off. So you get the message there. Next slide. So this is interesting. This is a stat from Q4 last year. 75% of all data breach incidents in school districts originated from vendor network access. So this is a fascinating statistics only because this is what we're seeing as well, an escalation in this. So don't just think ed tech vendors. So don't just think ed tech vendors, which is what everyone thinks, because these were largely unvetted when we had to, you know, when all these districts had to respond and scramble for adding these new ed tech vendors. But no, this is also, think of like point of sale systems in the cafeteria. Think about HVAC vendors. Any other examples you can think of?
Actually, the example William opened up with, that vendor or the ransomware attack in one of the districts that we serve several years ago, that was actually because a vendor doing SQL maintenance on a SQL server had talked the district into opening some ports up through the firewall. Needless to say, that vendor actually went away. They stopped using that vendor. District never did anything about the ports. Nobody ever knew they were open. And that's where that breach actually started from.
Right.
So it's things like that that allow, you know, some of these bad actors in.
Right, and I guess you're probably aware, but you know, SOPA does address this in their conformance. So basically, you'll have to harden all your vendor contracts to ensure that they're compliant with, you know, data privacy best practices. And so I know I'm delving into Tyler, your territory, Michael's territory, but again, we're always like looking for data. So this is what comes from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners data. This is just first 2 quarters of 2020. And again, it's just the same kind of trends, but this data represents actual cyber insurance claim activity. So 41% ransomware increase year over year, 54% of those originated from email or phishing campaigns, 47% increase in the severity of their ransomware attacks. And this was a horrible one to see. 45% of the cases had no recovery of funds. And when we talk about our incident response planning, the first 48 hours are critical. They're just critical to recover any kind of funds. The FBI will tell you that, you know, you'll read about that, but it's really important to have a plan in place. So, Ken, I know you're probably aware of this, but every superintendent asks me about this particular case in Ohio. Aurora City Schools, $4.3 million was stolen within 90 minutes. And this is how sophisticated these players are. The QBot came in, or the malware came in through a single employee who received a phishing email from her son's swim coach. That's how sinister it was. That's how much social engineering went behind creating this attack. So she clicked on the link because it was an update of his swim schedule. It executed the QBot into the district. And that QBot bounced around for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks before it landed on a second employee's desktop. And the QBot was designed to locate financial workstations. That particular employee received a phone call from Huntington Bank, Aurora City School Bank. She answered the call. They asked her to put in her credentials because they were doing upgrades. She was suspicious and said, hold on. She looked at the LED to see that number, where it came from. She picked up her cell phone, called the number. Good morning, Huntington Bank customer service. She said, someone wants me to enter my credentials. Go ahead, we're doing upgrades. Click, she entered in her credentials. 90 minutes later, $4.3 million was stolen. Obviously, you know, from a treasurer's perspective, there's other problems here. They should have had better controls in terms of their transfer policies, which we address, by the way, with our cybersecurity solution. We cover all these different ways people can approach a district and exploit it. So, and then, you know, I know William had alluded to earlier that 20% of our staff comes from the education sector, one of which is a superintendent, a former superintendent. And he was able to have a relationship with the superintendent who was the superintendent at the time, who's retired. And he was able to give us the actual forensics report. So we really do understand this case study at a deeper level, and we'll be able to reference that later in the. So I know you probably, you know, Sean, Chris, you probably know this very well. And I know I talked about earlier the K-12 organization. Well, last month, the CIO from Rockford City Public Schools actually came on and talked about this case study. And I'm sure you know about it. September 6th, they were hit from a ransomware attack. They were shut down. It was weeks before they were able to restore instructional services, and months before they were fully operational.
They're a client of ours. They're in our program. They're in CLIC.
Yep. Was that Lori who talked from the district? Their chief legal?
No, the CIO, Jason Berthel.
Oh,
yeah. So, and he said even part of their backups were encrypted. So now he is so paranoid. We laugh about it because he actually does tape backups now in addition to, you know, air gapping his backups. So, and then you can see on September 11th, this is just 5 days later, Rockford School Board members approved $544,000 in IT and security expenses, plus an additional $376 a couple days later. So you can see how costly these are, just in terms of remediation, forensics, and what. Ken, I know you're on, so we want to talk a little bit about Ohio Data Privacy Act. So a lot of reasons people are being driven to our solution come from a need to be compliant with data privacy laws, as well as their interest in making sure they can maintain or not get restricted insurance coverage. So I get asked a lot about the Ohio Data Privacy Act. And in Ohio, we take on a little different approach. They have offered, right now, they have offered safe harbor to any entity that pursues reasonable conformance. And so there's no, you know, private right of action. There's no, you know, collective right of action. So schools can protect themselves if they come into reasonable conformance. And our law actually goes and actually names the two cybersecurity frameworks that would be reasonable, considered reasonable conformance. And those are the NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, and the CIS, the Center for Internet Security Frameworks. And our solution was built to this model. So we are, you know, in compliance and always working toward better levels for further compliance. So your SOAP Act in Illinois, as you know, compliance has to be conforming by July 1. And while your law doesn't necessarily name the frameworks themselves, they do reference reasonable security practices. And so I think you probably have seen the document that the ITC Illinois has been circulating. They've adapted, they've interpreted what reasonable security policies look like, and we've adapted this to our own solutions. So you can see the first column, you want to go up one more, sorry, is that? The first column, see it says CIS controls. So ITC Illinois did this, and it's really a great tool. So there's all the CIS controls, and what we've done is we've overlaid both our managed service solution as well as our managed cybersecurity. So basically we check every single box.
So this is just showing from that document from the Illinois ITC. Basically, it's CIS Control Group 1, which is the base level of conformity for CIS controls. Actually, our solution implements a lot of Group 2's controls as well. But really, we wanted to show that our solution actually hits every single control that they're referencing here for Illinois.
Right. And also, interestingly enough, when we look at this, when we talk about, they talk about log analytics, and they talk about antivirus analytics within these control ones. And ours goes well beyond that. And while that's it's fine to be compliant. The best practices would suggest a little bit more advanced solutions, which ours provide, and we'll highlight that a little bit later. Okay, next one. So just to, quick synopsis for the obvious, cybersecurity prevention goals for K-12. Obviously, you want to prevent fiscal loss from ransomware, fund transfer fraud. Obviously, you want to prevent the exfiltration of data. But most importantly, you want to, prevent the disruption of instruction and just general administrative operations. So what we do is, and any solution worth its weight in gold, they all start out with the same thing. We do an initial assessment so we can determine what the exposure is of that district. And what we've done is we've developed a very tailored to the K-12 space. So initially, we've developed this proctored assessment where we look at 18 different risk categories. We've developed this from the CIS, but we've added additional categories. Do you want to go to the next? Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so basically all of our questions through our assessment were developed not only through those different controls and frameworks, but also working with banks, different insurance companies, different institutions that our schools here locally have worked with to help develop their own standards. So really putting a brain trust together on figuring out what's important to a school cybersecurity wise and how do we address those different needs.
Right, so when we bring on the initial engagement is we do an assessment. And so when we see those 18 risk categories, we cover the insurance, we cover the banking, we cover everything that touches that technology environment. And every single one of those categories, there's an impact and probability analysis we do, and we come up with a cyber score per category. And that we use that as the benchmark to start the year with, and when they join the solution, then we look at the next year and we do it all over again and see what we've improved. And it also helps us define those goals within the onboarding stage as well as ongoing throughout the year. So again, for the cybersecurity assessment, we do the proctored assessment, then we do a dark web scan where we run this against that district's domain, and we discover every single password that's been exploited and is now on the dark web, and we report that in real time. We do an initial phishing campaign to actually show the district where they are in terms of their need for user awareness training. We do a vulnerability scan where we plug in this device on their network, and it actually looks for out-of-date hardware and any software patches needed. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, and Chris can give you some really interesting examples of what we find. And then we sit down with that district and we report on the findings, and then we share with them where they think the priorities need to be for the first 30 days and the 90 days. And typically we use this as a tool. This is just a 2 to 3 week engagement. And we charge $3,500 if the district is 8,000 students or less. We charge $4,500 if it's 8,000 students or more. And really what it does is a lot of IT directors use this to socialize the cost, or to validate why they need the ultimate cybersecurity solution.
Yeah, so our solution really, and if you're familiar with any of the frameworks we've talked about, you'll understand these concepts as protection, detection, and response. So there's 3 areas we try to focus on, and we kind of equate it to a house. What does our house look like, our cybersecurity house? So the first one being protection. So obviously we want to protect our house, and we do that through things like EDR, next generation antivirus, through different control policies, whether that's acceptable use policies or policies for what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do with personal devices on the network. If you're allowed to have personal devices on the network, are they segmented? All those different things. Different password policies, as well as multi-factor or 2-factor authentication. Denise already touched on the annual assessment where we redo that proctored assessment every year to show progress or lack of progress, depending upon what happens. Because obviously this is a partnership with whatever districts we're working with. We look at it as, we take one oar of the boat and we're rowing it. We expect the district to take the other oar and row it. Otherwise, we're going to be rowing in circles and not really get anywhere. So we want to both be rowing in the same direction. User education, which is a huge one, and I think I'll talk about that here in this slide. Actually, every month we have a set of trainings that we send out through our different channels that our customers subscribe to. We do a end user training, which is very non-technical, but for example, May is authentication month, so we'll send out a video. We do a blog and a white paper about authentication, what's important, what you can do, to improve your authentication practices, whether that's two-factor authentication, using different passwords with a password manager, so on and so forth. And we also send out a very technical paper to the district IT department on, well, here's how you do some of these things, so you don't have to go out and necessarily do all the research on your own. We also do different social media posts throughout the month on tidbits on, for example, on authentication, what you can do, not only for your school, but in your personal life. One of the biggest value adds we see as part of our awareness training is it doesn't really only affect people's work environment, it affects their personal lives as well, because cybersecurity is something that you take home with you every night when you're on the internet, whether you're doing Facebook or you're checking out your kids' sports schedules or whatever's going on. So we look at this as a huge value add for the district to promote as something that is improving not only the district security, but the people that work for them, their lives as well.
Great. Right, so I know under the protection house, I know if you saw the EDR, that's endpoint detection and response. And I don't know if you're familiar with what these software tools do, but basically it's the next generation of antivirus. And what it does is, instead of traditional legacy antivirus, like the one that didn't detect the Q-bot in the Aurora City School, is that it doesn't just hit up against a database of signature malware. It actually goes beyond that and uses artificial intelligence and machine learning in real time to detect anomalies and malware. So the product we use is called Sentinel-1, and this is enterprise class grade and beyond. So this is what the banks use, financial institutions, large municipalities. And just last month, Sentinel-1 won the Gartner 2021 Gartner Magic Quadrant. And of the 19 EDR solutions, this is all enterprise class, of the 19 enterprise class EDR solutions, it made it into the Magic Leader Quadrant with Microsoft. So it is a big win. But the most exciting one, I think, is the MITRE Ingenuity. So it won #1 out of 29 EDR solutions, all enterprise class again. It won #1, and basically it didn't miss any detections across either the Microsoft Windows operating systems or the Mac OS systems. And why this one is really the one to look for is because this comes from the MITRE Corporation, which the MITRE Corporation, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is a fully funded arm of the US government. So it might be a corporation, but it's just a way for the government to spend money on or attract talent. And it literally sits a couple blocks away from the CIA headquarters. It is the artificial intelligence arm of the US government. So that's why this was such a big win for Sentinel-1. And then I'd like to point out some real world examples. So I guess you know that on May 7th, Colonial Pipeline was hit by the DarkSide ransomware. So 3 days later, Sentinel-1, to be cute, they put it in a white lab, the DarkSide virus with Sentinel-1, and there's a YouTube video of it. It's funny. The second that DarkSide is executed, in milliseconds, it's detected, quarantined, and remediated in milliseconds. So it's kind of a fun video to watch if you want. And just one other real world example here. You can buy Sentinel-1. Districts can buy this. School district, as you know, Sean.
Yep.
And so we're going through the pitch, and the IT director says, "Oh my God, I just installed Sentinel-1." And so we're like, "Oh, that's great." So the other component of our Sentinel-1 is that all of these alerts roll up under a 24/7 SOC, the Security Operations Center. And these aren't call center guys. These are guys, trained engineers solely in security. So we're like, "God, what'd you pay for it?" Well, he paid almost 3 times as much as we would have charged for a version that's actually monitored by a 24/7 SOC. And just one other aside on this is that we do threat analytics on this solution. And so when we go ahead and deploy Sentinel-1 in a district, we customize the settings. We know what we're doing. We look at the environment and we calibrate it to the district. So when we run these threat analytics, we're able to see that, across all our platforms that we're running Sentinel-1, it's about 64% of Sentinel-1's default settings catching it, and the other 36% are called agency settings, where we're catching it based on our sensitivity settings. So that's how much value we add, customizable per district. So it's just an interesting value that we add, and we're doing it much cheaper.
Can I just jump in with a quick question? This is Chris, and I have to leave at 11, but obviously keep going without me. But just trying to think of if we engage with you for CLIC, and this is an option for districts, does this replace other things they are doing? Does this supplement? Because I think a lot of us have some efforts now. So the question is going to be, is this done in addition? Is it done in concert with, or does it supplant what we're doing? So an example is, some districts may have a firm they already use to do penetration testing and full security audits, and they're investing significant funds in that. Would that be something they could buy up to with your company, or would they still be using a separate company? Because I worry that there's going to be a little fatigue if they have a lot of different things to manage, right? If they're doing an email phishing campaign with one tool, if they're doing these services through you guys, if there's a third penetration testing company. So how does it typically work in the real world?
Sure, Chris, that's a great question. And it really depends on, you mentioned a couple different solutions there. It depends on the solution and what you're comfortable with. So typically, like you mentioned phishing last, phishing is something that, if you're in a contract, we would say finish out your contract and let's do a demo of what we're going to do as far as our phishing campaign and user awareness training does. And if you like what you're doing better than what we're doing, or vice versa, we can go that direction. We're not saying you have to fit in this specific set of rules to use our solution. So some things are in concert with, some things are supplemental, some things would replace.
Yeah.
It's going to depend on each solution set, and each customer is a little bit different.
Antivirus takes a very similar approach. We believe in the SentinelOne product. I think it's best out there, and I think we're able to offer it at a very economical. I think we're able to offer superior protection at an economical price. But many districts already have some sort of antivirus protection deployed. We would work with them to figure out, how much longer they have on that contract or that agreement, and figure out how we could probably transition them to SentinelOne at that point, unless they're using something equivalent, which there isn't a whole lot of equivalency out there. So we would typically replace that or phase that in over time. And then if they're working with other firms, some of that we may be able to take over. Some of that we may work in conjunction with those other firms, but we can figure out how to manage the workload, not only for the districts, but also partner with other partners that they're already engaged with.
So part of it is us figuring out what that sort of base suite is for CLIC members, and then what the individual buy-up is for then certain districts, right? And
sure.
And so it's tweaking that base suite to make sure we're getting enough coverage that we need, but not adding on so many things that they might have it covered elsewhere, and then have the buy-up and all that.
Sure.
And SentinelOne, like I've heard very good things, and I know that's sort of top of class, and I know from a lot of districts' perspectives, they do want top of class and virus, but changing can be difficult because of the licensing they have and because of the deployment issues. And so, if we're bringing this to districts, some of them may say, you want me to change my antivirus, and that may just overwhelm them. And so how do we kind of think that through? Or they may throw out a number of different things like, oh, that won't work in our environment because it doesn't work with this system we have, or this system.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Chris, I think that's a great question about supplement versus supplant. And, as I'm listening to the presentation, I'm thinking to myself, this is, I might want to have two different sets of eyes look at this, right? I might want to have two different companies challenge, our network to see where our vulnerabilities are. I mean, no, quite honestly, I'm, listening through their presentation, I'm starting to sweat a little bit because I'm like, crap, like, do we do that? Like, I think we got that. And have we talked about that recently? Because, with the SOPA, we're going through the SOPA conversion, right? And there's all sorts of work on that. But, I am worried. I preach to my team, my financial team, constantly about, definitely what we are careful of. And we're, we used to be 95% check-based, paper check-based, right?
Sure.
We're starting to increase, like we're starting to take advantage of a virtual credit card program through Capital One that allows us that, to earn back some money, rebate money by paying with a virtual credit card. But we have all these damn third-party processors because we have a software that we're using for ticket sales for this, that, or the other thing. And, those make me nervous. So I think the supplement and supplant are two really good points.
Right. And just, to piggyback on Chris here, there is the option of some of them, they're ordering these licenses for the antivirus at the endpoint.
Yeah.
So they see the SentinelOne product, they see our SOC, and they say, you know what, just put it on our critical infrastructure, our superintendent suite, our treasurer suite, anywhere there's sensitive data residing. And so until they get off those long-term contracts. And so it gives them a way to give them that hybrid, so they still have some control and a lesser product at the endpoint. And we're still covering all the critical infrastructure. So there are ways to create, if we had a survey of what your CLIC members, environments look like, if we found some common ground, we could create a base product around them. We could certainly explore that.
Yeah, and I think we could do a survey, and what you're going to see is that there is going to be some variance, right? And because we're a big state, various sizes of districts. And Illinois is a state that doesn't standardize a lot, and so while we've been making sure we're all doing like MFA and sort of the best practices, when you get into like antivirus, you're going to see a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that just is the nature of Illinois.
Ohio is very similar in that respect. It's not one of those states where it's highly centralized or a lot comes down from the top. Yeah.
And the only other thing I'd add about, when we talk about the solution, what's supplemental, what's complementary, what can be replaced, is that, I don't want to sound like we're arrogant. We have the end-all solution to everything. And we'll be the first to admit that we do take a layered security approach where, a lot of people that talk about cybersecurity, it's just about antivirus, or it's just about policy, or it's just about this and just about that, where we've tried to take a lot of things that are most important to schools and put them together in a package. Is it everything? It is not. So we're very, very welcoming to partnerships with, other firms that may bring something to the table that we can't or we don't know how to.
Right, and we're careful not to point this out too much, but back to my point about the IT device, the device versus IT staff ratio, you can deploy these technologies. You can buy an expensive car. If you don't know how to drive it, it really just doesn't matter. It's just a waste of money, So, that's where the expertise comes in, and we're sensitive to that when we talk to these IT directors. They need help. They do.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to have to drop off in a sec, but what I'd love to see, is what that proposal is in terms of what is sort of that base set of tools, and how the buy-up looks for different districts, who want to go further, and then then we can evaluate it from there.
Okay.
Excellent. It's nice meeting you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Chris.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, I hope you're not fatigued. We're almost through the slides.
Doing good.
We're good. Okay, so
Detection's the next area. Obviously, we want to protect the best we can, but as everybody on this call knows, that eventually something somewhere is going to get in. So then, how do we detect that? Well, it's from 24/7 dark web monitoring in real time. It's from ongoing vulnerability scanning to, finding what's on the network. And one of the things, as a side note, that the first time we do a vulnerability scan, it's always amazing when we give that report to the IT director and they say, where did this airport come from? Well, we don't know where it came from. It's not our network. Or why is there a Windows XP device showing up here? Well, you have Creston controls on the wall, or some HVAC machine down in a dungeon somewhere that can't be upgraded because the HVAC software is so old. But it's on the network, so it's a problem. And it's amazing just to see kind of all these different things that you just don't think about on a daily basis because it's not in front of your mind. Right. You're thinking about the superintendent and the treasurer and what I'm going to do this week with this sporting event, or like you said, you talked about, Sean, graduation coming up, right? So those other things, those little things you just don't think about. And this is able to help pull that out.
Well, And to that point, we had a client that we were doing just the $3,500 scan on, the assessment scan on, and we found a former head of maintenance's computer that was still sitting turned on in a corner that people had kind of forgotten because the position had been replaced by an outsource, and it was still sitting there and had a Trojan horse in it. So that computer was quickly eliminated from the network, but literally we found that out through an assessment. So.
Right, and so with this vulnerability scanning, we do this every month, and I don't know if you know this, the cadence of this, but every second Tuesday of every month is Patch Tuesday, and so all the software providers push out those patches on the second Tuesday of every month. So we run the vulnerability scan over that following weekend to alert a district, hey, that patch came out, you didn't install it. So it's on a cadence, and because this is such a dynamic environment, that's why we do it this way, and we do it this way for a reason. So we're on top of everything. So that's really interesting. And then the other thing maybe we want to point on here is the SIM.
Yeah, so we also deploy a SIM in your environment. So basically a SIM is a log collector, if you will, much more advanced than just a simple syslog type device, but collects all types of logs, firewall logs, switch logs, whatever the case might be, correlates all those logs and sends it to our SOC, so that on a 24/7 basis, we're looking for things that, might not necessarily catch the eye of somebody on a normal day basis. One of the things we were able to catch here recently is that we had a district where they were getting, basically it was a brute force attack, but it was, well, I'm going to try this computer, and then I'm going to try a computer over here, and then a computer over here. So it was never tripping anything on a local machine or at a much higher level because it was being distributed so randomly, where with that log analytics, it was able to correlate, hey, something's not right here. We should take a look at this. And then we did investigate it and found that there was a brute force attack going on. We were able to get that stopped.
Yeah, so it's a great tool for exposing data exfiltration. And again, all these alerts, all these log alerts, they roll up under our 24/7 SOC, and they're analyzed in real time.
And then lastly is response. So, unfortunately, if something were to happen, we have to have a response in place. So this includes all incident response planning, from what's that going to look like, who do we call, when do we call them, what your social message is going to be, your press releases, so on and so forth. We can help with all of that, as well as any ransomware rollback we can do through our SentinelOne. Full remediation forensics, working with law enforcement to figure out what they need, when they need it, how they need it, and just really being that third-party liaison between all the different entities that need to really correlate this information, and up to and including on-site action if needed.
Chris, I have a question. This is Michael. In regards to this response, many of our cyber carriers, they have a response team like Baker Hostetler or Phillips Dunbar. There's a 24/7 number. Would you work in conjunction with them, working with them? Absolutely.
So depending upon what the district has in place, if it's, calling that insurance company, we would work with the district to develop the plan on what that action needs to be for them. So in your case, it would be, okay, we call the insurance company, we work with their team and work through their plan. Whereas maybe a different insurance provider, it's, well, we want you to call law enforcement first.
Right.
And when they tell you to call us, then call us.
Right.
It's a customized plan based on what that district needs.
Right, and one of the first things we do in the onboarding process is we define this incident response plan specific to whatever they already have in place. Whether it's defined by that insurance policy or otherwise, but we know what to do, and we have all this templated.
Yeah, and really kind of wrap things up before we get into this slide is one of the things that we often get asked is that, well, how much am I going to be locked down? What am I going to have trouble with? What are my teachers going to complain to me about? Well, really, that at the end of the day is our goal as a K-12 provider is to not have lost learning, but also at the same time not make a teacher's job any harder than it already is, because we realize they have tough jobs already. So it's to keep the classroom moving in an efficient pace, but also to make sure that not only the faculty and staff are secure, but the students are secure.
Right. We like to throw this at the end because this is good, some good news. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the ESSER 2 funds have been approved for cybersecurity applications, and so some of our districts have already in the process of applying for this, and